Hello, everybody. We are going to get started here. So thanks for taking the time this morning, and for those on the East Coast this afternoon, to listen to our first spring webinar here of our webinar series of the spring. Today, of course, we're going to be talking about tree growth regulators 101, what they are, how to use them, and how they can benefit our business. This is really like a two-part series where tomorrow we'll be speaking even more on some of these benefits of bringing these into our business. But for today, again, we'll have a really great introduction on tree growth regulators, the science behind them, and again, some uses for them. Before we get started, though, again, this webinar is worth 1 ISA CU. So if you did not put in your ISA certification number when you registered for this webinar, if you open up your chat box or go into the question box, you can see here there's this little tiny triangle. If you click on that, that will open up your question box. If you click on this, it'll open up your chat box. You can put in your ISA certification number there, and we'll make sure that you get your CU for this talk today. Likewise, if you have any questions during the course of the webinar, if you put them into that question section there, at the end of the webinar, we'll try to get to as many of those as possible for you guys. So again, anytime you have questions, please fill out that field, and I will do my best to answer those for you at the conclusion of the discussion here this afternoon / this morning. One more thing is, you will notice that there's this other thing that says handouts right here. If you open that, you will see you can download a copy of our CanvaStat Opportunity Guide. And again, we'll be discussing CanvaStat in depth here. So you can click that open, click on there, and you can download that CanvaStat Opportunity Guide from there. Again, any other questions during the course of our discussion today, feel free to type that right into that question box there. So real quick, the voice coming to you today through your computer screens or tablets or smartphones, whatever you're listening on, is me, Patrick Anderson. I'm an arborologist here with Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements. My role is to travel the country and work with Rainbow's clients to make sure that they are getting the best out of our products, helping with diagnostic support, protocol support, all those things. As you can see here, this is my contact information. If you have any questions at the end of this webinar or throughout the course of whenever, please feel free to contact me. And of course, we have our direct technical support number where, again, during regular business hours, Central and East Coast time, we do have somebody that is live and can support you with any protocol support you should have, ordering, questions on rates, all those types of things. Just a quick call for volunteers. We are going to be hosting the Slew Branches again this year. This is very exciting. For those of you who are not familiar with Slew Branches, you may have been stuck under a rock for the past few years, but that's fine. Slew Branches is a day of service where arborists throughout the entire nation volunteer their time at Veterans Affairs cemeteries. This year it'll be September 19th. It's hard to believe it's just 6 months away. So again, we are always looking for volunteers and sponsors to help us with this event. To learn more, please go to salutingbranches.com. Find out where your nearest cemetery is. Find out how you can help. This is a really great event. It's a really great cause. And we always have a great time volunteering and meeting new people around the country with that. Just real quick, a little background on Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements. Again, you've gotten to this webinar, so you probably know a little bit about us. But again, just to let you know that we are grounded in science. Everything we do, everything we say is based upon peer-reviewed science. And so that is a distinction with us, is that we offer predictable results with all of our protocols. Now, of course, predictable may not always be like spectacular, but at least, you know, you have an idea of the results you're going to get with our products and our protocols. And just as an example of some of our research, in 2016, we did over 106 research trials. So again, we are back. All this information that we'll be talking about today comes from a very strong understanding of how this product works and how this can benefit trees out there in our landscapes. Again, we've created over 160 protocols. We've created white papers. We perform training and classes throughout the country. So at any time, again, feel free to reach out to us with any type of question, protocol question you might have. And of course, I always like to show our company values. The two things I always like to point out, again, of course, the fact that we are science-based, as we already discussed, and the honesty and integrity. Especially today, I like to talk about that. I spend a lot of time working with plant growth regulators. I really, really like plant growth regulators. I've had a lot of great experiences with them. So I get really excited when I talk about plant growth regulators. And so I often joke when I talk about plant growth regulators, there's two sides of the room. One side of the room thinks that, well, these things are a silver bullet, and they're the best thing ever. And so I always want to say that, you know, I will be talking a lot about the positive benefits of plant growth regulators today. Know that these are just a tool in your toolbox. They have a lot of great potential, but they're certainly not a silver bullet. So the other side of the room looks at me and thinks, well, this guy is just full of it, which, you know, we can talk about that after the webinar. But again, know that this is all science-backed research and data that we're going to be presenting today. And again, we hold this very true, this honesty and integrity. So you're going to be getting good information today. A lot about Rainbow's experience with plant and tree growth regulators. So we began working with tree growth regulators all the way back in 2001, which is, again, that's hard to believe that, you know, it's been the better part of a decade, almost 2 decades now, that we've been working with plant growth regulators. In 2003, 2004, we brought out Canvastat, which really has become the industry standard with tree growth regulators, especially in the landscape. It is also the most widely used tree growth regulator by arborists and utility markets. As I mentioned before, you know, we are not just a one and done with our products and our research. We continue to publish peer-reviewed research on our tree growth regulators and shrub growth regulator products. And so this is a paper that just came out 2 years ago, almost to the day. This was published in the Journal of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry in 2016. And this is just, again, some more information about the timing and use of our plant growth regulators. And some names I've noted here, you see the lead author there is Chris Haugen, who is, again, he's our national accounts representative here at Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancement. Emily Bick, who was working with us at the time, but has gone on to gain her, or is in the process of getting her PhD out in Berkeley. And finally, Sean Burnick, who is our Chief Operating Officer. So again, mixed in with these industry researchers, we continue to look at these products. We support all of our PGR products that we produce. So a quick history on plant growth regulators in general. So, you know, often when people have not been exposed to plant growth regulators in the past, they sound kind of scary, and it's okay. I mean, it sounds spooky. A plant growth regulator stopping plants from growing, it's almost counterintuitive to the way most of us have gone about our careers. You know, I remember early on, if a plant was growing big and vigorously, then that was our goal. So stopping a plant from growing is an interesting concept to many arborists out there, and it certainly was to me, you know, again, more than 10 years ago when these first were introduced to me. But it's important to know that, again, these are not new. They're not anything spooky or scary. They've been around for a long time, and they became popularized in the floriculture industry. And so what the floriculturalists realized is that when they treated their plants with a plant growth regulator, they had a plant that grew uniformly, was darker green, and was full. And so, of course, that is a great benefit if you're producing a lot of annuals. And so if you have ever gone to, you know, a nursery center or what have you, local nursery center, big box store nursery center, and bought annuals and planted them, then you had indeed likely contacted a plant growth regulator in your past. So again, this is not new, this is not spooky. We come in contact with these all the time. The other example I like to use is that of like a hanging plant. So if you've ever purchased one of those hanging plants and put it in your window, you know, the first few weeks, they're growing kind of uniformly, they look nice and dark green, they're beautiful. Give it about a month or so and they start getting leggy, they start getting chlorotic, and it's not because you've done anything wrong, it's just that that plant is breaking plant growth regulation. So again, this stuff is nothing new. We encounter these things every day, especially those of us working in horticulture and arboriculture. So some of the negative things you may have heard about plant growth regulators in the past. So we utilize their type 2 plant growth regulators. Now, the initial version of plant growth regulators was this type 1 plant growth regulator. And type 1 plant growth regulators are indeed true plant growth regulators in that they stop cell mitosis. So they actually block the plant cells from dividing, a true plant growth regulator. And so they work phenomenally well at keeping plants from getting larger. But there are some, in some cases, in some species, in some application methods, some unintended consequences of a type 1 plant growth regulator. Again, they're stopping the cells from dividing. So in some cases, we get kind of misshapen new growth. We get distorted new growth, distorted leaves, maybe some witches blooming. We also can cause a chlorosis of the plant, so turning the plant yellow when we apply a type 1 plant growth regulator. And so while they work extremely well at stopping plants from growing, which in some cases is our number one concern, we do have some issues that might come up when we apply them. Now, this is a slight contradiction to type 2 plant growth regulators. So type 2 plant growth regulators, the way they work is they work by altering the amount of hormones produced in the plant. And so namely, when we apply a type 2 plant growth regulator like Candestat, which is primarily what we'll be talking about today, or Trintex, which is a fuller application for shrubs, what we're doing is we're asking the plant not to produce so much growth hormone. And as a symptom of that, what we have is we have cells that aren't getting as large. And so if we see our diagram here, if we look at normal growth compared to growth that was a tree growth regulator was applied to, we just have cells that are smaller. So the plant is still growing. It's still producing the same amount of cells, same amount of leaves, flowers, what have you. It's just now that internodal growth, that space in between nodes, is not getting as large. And so one of the great ironies of managing tree growth or shrub growth, if you are going to manage plant growth by pruning alone, you're actually encouraging the plant to produce more growth hormone so it can produce a vigorous, fast-growing stem. Because again, energy is created in the leaves. That's where photosynthesis happens. So if you prune a great portion of the plant away, the plant's going to respond. You've just taken away its ability to eat. So it wants to respond and put out a bunch of vigorous new growth. So again, if we are pruning plants with the specific goal of maintaining their size, we're actually encouraging them to grow faster. And of course, there's some other issues that go into that. Now, I mentioned when we use a type 2 plant growth regulator like Candestat, what we're doing really is we're altering how hormones are produced within the tree. And so our first hormone change, and this is the one that directly relates to how a plant is growing, is we are going to block the production of gibberellin or gibberellic acid. And so from a growth regulation standpoint, so from where a tree is not getting as large anymore, that gibberellin is responsible for cell elongation and expansion. So simply put, if we block the process to produce gibberellin, we have less gibberellin, we have shorter, skinnier cells, which of course then would give us that illusion of growth control. Now, the interesting part about this is that some of the elements, some of the direct elements that go into producing gibberellin also go into chlorophyll production. So as we go through our talk today and we see some more pictures, what we'll also notice is that across species, we're going to see trees green up, per se. So the tree is going to be able to create more chlorophyll for itself because there's going to be less just inorganic elements going into the need to put into gibberellin. So that's our first hormonal change with gibberellin. Our second change is that we're going to see an increased amount of abscisic acid. And so abscisic acid is a plant protection hormone. Abscisic acid is produced as a response to stress because it can be beneficial. It produces these kind of beneficial physiological responses within the plant. So a few things that abscisic acid can help with is one is with auxin, it plays a role in stimulating that fine absorptive root growth. So this is the distinction between woody root growth, which we'll talk about later, but it will produce this fine absorptive root growth, and of course those absorptive roots are what are pulling water and nutrients from the soil. The second thing it does, from a drought protection standpoint, is it helps the plant to respond faster to drought by closing the stomates. And so we'll discuss that here in a moment as well. Finally, just in general, it helps your cells from dehydrating. So an increased amount of citric acid helps trees be more drought resistant just because it helps cells from dehydrating in general. And then it can also stimulate the production of certain phytodefense compounds and things like enzymes that are going to help the plant to be more disease resistant, which again we'll discuss as we move through our discussion here. And so the result here is, this is an example of a Royal Poinciana down in Florida. The result there, of course, is we have a plant that is going to look greener, is going to be more drought resistant, is going to be more resistant to pests and pathogen, and we're going to have greater meristematic above ground, or excuse me, not greater, but we're going to have reduced meristematic above ground growth. Now let's start digging into like some of the science behind how this stuff is working from a beneficial standpoint. So the one thing we discussed is we are going to see greater drought protection when we apply a type 2 plant growth regulator like Candestat. And so what we see is that the stomates, the increased amount of citric acid helps the stomates to close. And so it's not that they necessarily close more often and for a longer period of time, because the first thing that many of us start thinking of is, well, the stomates need to be open for photosynthesis to happen. If those stomates are closed, then we're not exchanging gases and photosynthesis isn't happening. What that increased citric acid does is it allows the plant to respond faster to drought and close those stomates faster. And so I stole this graphic from Davy's Twitter feed. So if there's a Davy person out there, thank you very much. If not, then, it's between us. We don't have to let them know. But anyhow, this is a great graphic because it tells you how trees react to drought. And so first, of course, it's the roots that realize that the tree is starting to dehydrate. They realize that the soil, rather, is beginning to dehydrate, beginning to lose water. And so the roots realize that the soil is drying, and they send a chemical response that goes through the trunk up into the leaves. And when that response hits that leaf, that's when the stomates close. And so when we have an increased amount of citric acid within the plant, that tree is able to respond to that signal that much faster. So again, it's not necessarily that the stomates are just closing more on their own. It's just that now the plant is able to respond faster to this drought response. And then there's this other thing down here that's interesting. And what this says is that, lack of rain isn't the only contributing factor to drought. Compacted soil, concrete, runoff, warmer soil can all cause drought stress in a plant. And so let's think about where many of us are managing trees in our landscapes, right? Many of us aren't foresters managing a stand of trees out in the woods. Many of us are arborists managing trees in people's front yards, in municipalities, in courtyards, in commercial sites, and all of these areas have reflected heat, which warms the soil. Many of these areas, again, are going to have some kind of a grayscape, like concrete or asphalt over the root system. And so even in a time where we have plenty of precipitation, we could still be inducing drought into trees. So we could be inducing drought-like systems into our trees based upon where we're trying to make them grow, not just because of a lack of water in the soil per se, or a dry year per se. Some other really cool data. This comes from Dr. Glenn Percival out of Reading, England. And again, you can see this was published in Arboriculture and Urban Forestry. And so what he did here is he had some potted oak trees, and he induced them to drought, which basically means he didn't water them. But prior to that, he treated some of his trees with paclobutrazol, again, the active ingredient in Candestat. And so what I want to draw you to here is this survival. And so what he found was 20% of the trees that were not treated with paclobutrazol died as a result of this trial. So again, these were trees that were induced to drought stress. The untreated trees, only 20% survived. If you compare that to the treated trees right here, at either one of the rates he used, he had a 100% survival rate of these oak trees. So by simply doing a soil-applied application of paclobutrazol, he was able to drastically improve these trees' ability to withstand drought in this particular trial. This here is a trial from the Morton Arboretum and Dr. Gary Watson. And so what we're seeing here, that white oak the leaves here on the left, again, this is drought-induced leaf scorch. So this is a tree under drought conditions, and this is the type of leaf scorch that we're seeing. If we compare that to this here on the right with a cambisat or paclobutrazol applied tree, and this is just one soil application, we're seeing a drastic reduction of drought-induced leaf scorch on this tree. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you'll notice in many of these pictures that our treated trees are going to have a higher chlorophyll content. They're going to look greener compared to our untreated trees. Likewise, this is one of Rainbow's trials. This is in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. This is bur oak. And again, what you can see here is our untreated trees showing scorch symptoms due to drought versus our treated trees, which again, we have very limited symptoms of leaf scorch due to drought. So those are some of the physiological changes that we see in the plant. We also see a morphological change in the plant when we apply a type 2 plant growth regulator like cambisat. The first thing that we're going to notice is we're going to have a thicker leaf cuticle. And so all plants, all trees, all shrubs have this leaf cuticle, this waxy cuticle that goes around the outside of the leaf. And that cuticle helps protect, it's very much like our skin. It helps the tree to protect itself from losing moisture, from diseases, things like that. And so when you have a thicker cuticle, it's going to do a few different things. One is, again, from a drought reduction standpoint, it's going to help the plant from losing so much water. So it's going to help the plant to conserve water within that leaf. And that's why we're seeing some of these, not only are we seeing these drought reduction symptoms because we have an increase in that citric acid, but we're also seeing it because of this morphological change in the leaf. So again, we're able to retain more leaf moisture because we have a thicker cuticle. Now, if we also start thinking about disease resistance, because we see disease resistance in trees treated with cambisat. If you think about how a leaf disease is going to affect a plant, so if a fungal leaf spore that wants to create a leaf spot is going to land on this leaf, it's going to land on top of this cuticle, it has to interact with some free water maybe, and then it's going to drop its feeding tube, its haustoria, down to that cuticle into the cells where it wants to do damage. And so if we have a thicker leaf cuticle, it just makes it that much more work that fungal disease spore has to do to start affecting the cells where it wants to start feeding. So again, while this isn't a treatment for leaf diseases, we are inducing the plant to be more resistant against these leaf diseases. And again, we'll look at some examples of this here in a little while. So our first morphological change is we see a thicker leaf cuticle. Our second morphological change is that we see an increased amount of trichome hairs per given area of leaf surface. And so again, these trichome hairs are going to play some neat little things as to how the plant is going to be both more disease resistant and drought resistant. From a drought resistant standpoint, what these little tiny hairs are going to do is they're going to create a microclimate around that leaf. And so again, that microclimate is going to reduce the amount of water loss, not only in the summertime, but also in the wintertime. There is data from Christmas tree farms that shows that Christmas trees that are treated with paclobutrazol have less winter injury damage. So we create this microclimate around the leaf that's going to help it to, again, retain more moisture within it. From a disease resistance standpoint, again, thinking about that leaf disease spore has to come in contact with the top of the leaf to germinate in most instances. And so if you see this picture here on the right, it would be very difficult for a spore to get down in there to create damage. So again, we're inducing this disease resistance due to some of the morphological changes in the leaf, which is pretty neat to think about. And as I mentioned, across the board, we're going to see an increase in chlorophyll production. Now, here's the cool thing that I haven't mentioned yet, is that in most instances, in many instances, when we apply this product as a soil application, so when we apply cambisat as a soil application, we're going to see 2 to 3 years of response in the plant. So we're going to see 2 to 3 years of growth control. We're going to see 2 to 3 years of this increased drought resistance. We're going to see 2 to 3 years of this increased disease resistance, and we're going to see 2 to 3 years of this increased chlorophyll production. So again, you start thinking about using this as a tool. If you have some of these trees that just aren't responding to our normal treatment regimen, you have now just another tool that you can bring in and use on these things. For those of us that don't have all the big fancy equipment too, this is easily applied as a soil drench, and we'll look at that here too. So you have a tool that you can bring in very quickly to help affect these trees positively. So let's talk a little bit more about how this plant growth regulator can help us. And so this was a paper that was posted by Dr. Dan Herms when he was at Ohio State. I believe now he's at the Davey Institute. And so what Dr. Herms theorized was that plants basically, they drop all of their energy into these 5 major buckets. So again, above ground top growth, reproductive structures like flowering and fruit, root growth, that fine absorptive root growth, defense compounds, and storage compounds. And so simply stated, if we ask the plant to stop putting so much of its resources into those above ground top growth, again, the plant is still going to collect the same amount of resources from the soil, it's still going to be collecting the same amount of water and inorganic elements from the soil, it's still going to be collecting the same amount of solar energy. It's just now it can take that energy and apply it into these other buckets. And so this is where we see, in some species, we see increased flowering and fruit production. We will see increased absorptive root production in certain soils and on certain species. We're going to see, again, we're going to see that disease resistance, and we're going to see the plant being able to withstand some other events due to the increased amount of storage compounds it can take advantage of. This piece of data here is from another Dr. Glenn. This is from the New Phytologist. And so what this graph is showing, I'll explain this just as a little bit. So on our left here, on this axis, this is a specific phytodefense compound. On our lower axis here, this is relative shoot growth, above ground top growth, what you have. So what this is showing is that as the trees put more energy into above ground growth, they are investing less into the production of the specific phytodefense compound. Whereas trees that are not growing as fast are investing more energy into this phytodefense compound. And so this is some of the science behind how we are seeing, again, some of this disease resistance. Is, again, the plant's able to not only change itself morphologically, as we just looked at, but it's also able to produce more of these phytodefense compounds to help it ward off some of these diseases. So again, this is from a paper. This was posted, published in the Journal of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry. This is from Dr. Austin up there in the Morton Arboretum outside of Chicago. And what we're seeing here is a drastic reduction in the amount of apple scabs on these apple trees. And this is through one soil application of paclobutrazol, again, the active ingredient in Canvastat. And so again, you can see our tree on the left, heavily infested with apple scab, looking a bit chlorotic, versus our tree here on the right. And again, you can still see that apple scab. It's not that we have prevented apple scab. Apple scab is still on this plant. It's just, again, we have a drastically reduced instance of that, as well as you can see those greener leaves make the plant look better. This is from the same paper. This is showing the disease severity rating of Phytophthora canker on blue spruce. Now, we'll discuss this further. In about 2 weeks, we'll be doing another webinar on Phytophthora canker and ways to manage it. But this is just, I guess, a quick little preview of this. So what Dr. Watson found is that one soil application of paclobutrazol, again, the active ingredient in Canvastat, drastically reduced the instance of Phytophthora canker on blue spruce. Again, tune in a few more weeks, and we'll talk a whole bunch more about that. Some of the other things, as we mentioned, is we're seeing that increased fibrous root growth. So again, this is this absorptive root growth. And so again, we have more roots in the soil. We're able to collect more resources. We're able to mine more water. So again, we're going to see that, that drought reduction, some of this drought resistance is coming through the ability to have more fine absorptive root growth. So that was pine trees after they were harvested. This is sugar maple after it was harvested. Again, you can see the difference between the treated and the untreated here. It's interesting to note, so those of you who do not own this best management practice published by the ISA, I would highly recommend it for many reasons. So there is a best management practice published by the ISA on root management. And within this best management practice, or industry best management practice, there is a quote that says paclobutrazol may increase the length and dry weight of regenerated roots in certain species. So again, this is not only is this within the literature that we see this, but this is also part of our published best management practices when it comes to managing roots. Now, this is one of my favorite ideas here that we're about to discuss. And so this comes from those of you that live in areas with high pH soils. You may have experienced chlorosis in trees, specifically things like pin oaks. And so let's look at this theory here. So, well, we know, right? Let's look at the facts here. So we know for a fact that when we have a high pH soil, things like iron get tied up in that high pH soil, so it becomes unavailable to plants. And so if you have a species like a pin oak, which is susceptible to iron chlorosis, if you take that tree and you plant it in a high pH soil, where again, iron is tied up by the pH, then every single pin oak planted in a high pH soil where iron is tied up should be chlorotic. And that's pretty sound logic if you follow that. But we know, again, for those of you that live in these areas with high pH soils, we know that not every single pin oak is chlorotic. Certainly many are, but not every single one is. And so we have to ask ourselves, what would that be? And if you look at this picture here, here we have a bright yellow, I'm going to say this is a lime green variety of pin oak here in the front. We have its neighbor in the tree lawn is green, have its neighbor in this yard is green. So why would that be? And so again, some research from Dr. Watson up there in Arboretum noticed that trees with a better developed root system are less likely to be corrosive. So again, if you have a tree with a well-developed root system, even if it's in a high pH soil, you have a less chance of it being chlorotic. Some other cool research here, and this is again from this Dr. Don Marks, what he finds is that trees with a well-developed root system can influence the rhizosphere, so that area directly around the roots, can influence that rhizosphere by 2 pH points. So you think about that. So first off, again, pH is on a logarithmic scale. So, when we're talking about, a pH of 5 to a pH of 6, that is a long way to go when we're talking about a logarithmic scale. So these trees with a healthy root system can influence the rhizosphere by 2 pH points. So if you have a tree that's growing in a pH of 8, which I know some of us out there are living in areas where we have these types of pHs, a healthy tree with a healthy root system can bring that pH directly around that little root system where it's taking in those nutrients, can bring it down to almost a 6. So again, being able to influence the root system of a tree. And now, again, I will say this is not like a silver bullet. We might have to do some things. We might have to do some decompaction. We might have to use our air spade. We might have to use, do some things to help break up the compacted soil so the plant can take advantage of this. But again, this is a phenomenal tool we have in our toolbox to help these trees green up. Here's some more research again from Dr. Watson. He repeated this trial again. And so what he found here, and I'll explain this chart to you. So SRT, for those of us that, again, climb trees or aware of tree climbing, this does not stand for the single rope technique. This stands for the standard radial trench. And so those of us who've been around for a while might remember the radial trenching method, where basically what you are doing is you are affecting spokes of soil away from the hub that is the tree, decompacting them and amending them. And it is still really a great way to affect trees in a positive way. That's what that stands for. And so what we can see here, this axis here is referring to root density. And so we can have our control trees. We compare those to our trees that are doing the radial trenching. Compare those to the trees there that are just being applied paclobutrazol, which is again cambistat, and then compare those to the combination of cambistat and the radial trenching. We can see that we can affect a tree to help it produce a greater density of fine roots, which again, you think about what we just explored there with the pH, the ability for a tree to affect its environment, to be healthy. If we can affect the tree in a way that we can produce a good amount of fine roots, then that might be about the best thing we can do for that tree. Here's another quick example of root regeneration. This is actually a trial I was a part of way back This is in the mid to late 2000s when I was at the Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory. So this was a tree risk assessment trial. This was put on by Dr. Tom Smiley at the Bartlett Tree Research Lab. And so what we did, as you can see here, is we cut roots with a large stump grinder, and then we hooked them up to a come-along, and we pulled those trees to 1 degree to see what kind of force it would take to pull a tree to 1 degree, basically, after we severed a bunch of roots. And so we have a bunch of trees, all of which have had half of the root systems completely severed. This research dovetailed into another piece of research, again, done by Dr. Tom Smiley, which, again, in this idea here is how could we best help a tree recover from a dramatic root loss. And so we had many treatments, but as you can see here, the Cambistat treatment compared to the control treatment, or Cambistat treatment here on the left, dark green, full, a nice looking tree. Again, half of the root system was cut off here compared to our control tree. So our control tree, again, half of the root system was cut off. But if we look at the difference 1 year after treatment, chlorotic, tip dieback, again, just one soil application of Cambistat, and we're helping this tree to recover from a dramatic root pruning event. And now, of course, we show this picture often. I would definitely say, you know, you watch some of these commercials and they say results not typical. I would definitely say results not typical. But this is where I would say this is now a possibility. You know, the idea of being able to save a tree that I think many of us here, when we walked up to this tree in 1989, would say, we're probably best to take this tree down, right? I think, you know, there's very little of us out here would be arguing to keep this tree. You know, you maybe talk about target rating and things like that, but, you know, for the sake of conversation here, we would probably all say this tree is just about done. Now, again, this is at the Morton Arboretum, so they have a lot of latitude to do things, and so they deadwooded this tree. We didn't make, you know, the dead wood come back to life, but they deadwooded this tree. They performed radial trenching, and they, again, applied a Cambistat treatment. And so this is our tree in 1989. Fast forward 5 years, and this is our plant. It looks like an entirely different plant. Fast forward another few years here, 2001. Fast forward again to 2014. We still have a tree that is beautiful, providing all of the ecosystem services, not to mention the aesthetics. So again, you know, this is the possibility that we have of using a product like this. And finally, of course, growth regulation has huge benefits. You know, how many of us are running into situations where, you know, the tree is planted, you know, a tree like a pin oak, for example, or a willow oak, or one of these trees that just want to get huge, you know, planted 5 feet from the house, is planted again in, you know, a tree boulevard along the roadway, where we have all kinds of cars and infrastructure and things like that, and just constant maintenance to keep this tree pruned off, away these things, not only just because they're running an infrastructure, but for safety. Again, street signs, street lights, all these things that need to be shown, constantly working to prune away these things. And so this being able to reduce the plant growth by anywhere from, you know, 30 to 70+% over a 3-year period has great benefits. And so we've already seen this picture here. You can see this is a bur oak. This is 1 year of growth compared to 1 year of regulated growth. Here we have water oak, again, are treated on the left and are untreated on the right. Here we have silver maple, again, are untreated on the left and this time are treated on the right. And I show some of these older pictures for a reason. It's not because I'm, you know, lazy, which, you know, maybe I am and we can argue that again later. But I show these older pictures just, again, to show people that this technology, while we're still learning about this technology, especially from a health benefit standpoint, the technology itself has been around for a long time. So this isn't a situation that you're going to bring this on and all of a sudden we're going to learn something that is, you know, super bad. This isn't going to be like an Imprellis situation for those of us that had lived that. This is very well researched. It's been around for a long, long time. It's going to work very, very well for you. So here again, we have here, I believe, sumac. Here again, this is our poster child. This is red oak, northern red oak. There's my boss right there, Sean Burnick. You can see here the silver maple. Again, this is our treated, this is our untreated. This is trees in my old house in Charlotte, North Carolina, and so it's hard to see on large trees, but I like this picture. So you guys can see both of these trees are over 55 inches in diameter, big trees. So this was my neighbor's tree. This is untreated, so you can see that top growth. This is my tree. This is treated. Again, you can see the difference in the amount of top growth being put on. You can also see that difference in color. Another thing that we can use this for those of us that have to manage tree-formed things like hollies, wax myrtles, ligustrums, these different plants that are managed, that are kind of like a shrub, managed like a tree, and we constantly have to shear and lollipop. Another good example would be things like crabapple. We can apply these to these smaller canopy plants and reduce the labor that goes into maintaining their shape. So here again, this is a holly shrub that's been turned into a tree form type thing. And so you can see the difference between our treated and our untreated there in the background. Our live oaks down in Florida, so in areas where we have very vigorous growers, you can see there the difference in the treated and untreated. Yellow tababuya down there in Florida, vigorous grower. Willow oak down there in Florida. You can see this, the nice thing about Florida, because stuff grows really, really fast, you can really see how stuff's working. So, this tree was that size last year. That's what we look at now. The other thing, as I said, we are going to manage all above ground meristematic growth. So not only are we going to slow tip growth, but we're also going to slow diameter growth. So again, this can be huge in certain situations. And you can see the difference between, our untreated growth rings, the year we treat, and then the ramp up to growth regulation. This is also a good example of how we can expect growth regulation to look. Depending upon when you're treating, of course, that treatment has to make its way all the way up through the canopy of the tree into that subapical meristem to stop that hormone production. And that's when, after that happens, that's when we really start seeing that growth regulation. But again, if we're dealing with situations like this, we have tree trunks that want to be huge, planted in areas that they just are, we know in the long term they're going to grow out of. We have a way of, again, it doesn't stop the growth, but we can significantly slow the growth of those trees. Same thing, buttress roots. Buttress roots, those large woody roots are, again, they're akin to this trunk. So not only are we going to slow down this trunk growth, we're going to slow down that buttress root growth. So again, if you have this large maturing tree that's planted right by a driveway, right by a sidewalk, we can help that plant live in that space for a longer period of time before it can start doing infrastructure damage like lifting and things like that. So another huge potential for this technology. As I mentioned, this is a very easy application. We can either do a lower soil drench, as displayed on our picture there on the left. So all we're going to do is we're going to dig a trench or a moat directly around the base of the tree. We're going to keep it as close to the base of the tree as possible. And we're just going to apply our solution into that little trench. We want to make sure we get into that mineral soil. We obviously want to make sure it doesn't run off, because this is a plant growth regulator, and it can regulate anything around that plant. So just dig our little trench, apply the product right in there, we're good to go. The other way we can do it is through soil injection. So you can see here we can use something like a gas-powered backpack in our HTI 2000 system, in which case we are providing the exact dose we need for every single tree site injection there into the soil around the base of the plant. Very easy to do. And so as we begin to conclude, we're just about on time here, we are going to have a greener plant. We're going to see that it is more resistant to diseases. We're going to see that it's more drought resistant. We're going to see we can reduce our top growth by 30 to 70%. We're going to be able to save on labor. We're going to be able to reallocate labor, and we're going to drastically reduce the amount of green waste we are producing in some situations there. So we have all forms, as I mentioned before, we've created all forms of white papers and protocols for this. We have an opportunity guide, which again, you can download right there in your handouts. And it'll give you some ideas of where you can use Canvas-Stat. Some of the opportunities, again, opportunity guide, opportunities for using it for not only size management, but also ways we can help trees survive in these urban-to-urban interfaces for a longer period of time. So tomorrow, I know you guys are probably like sad that we're going to conclude here in a few moments, but if you want to tune in tomorrow, same time, same channel, we'll talk more and more about some of the practical uses for these plant growth regulators, Canvastat, in the landscape. So today we covered over on the science. We covered a little bit about how it could be brought into your business. Tomorrow we'll cover the top 5 ways you can use tree growth regulators in your business. Some other great webinars we have coming up again on Monday, March 19th. We're going to talk about spotted lanternfly, which again, if you're on the East Coast, you are going to definitely want to tune into. On the 26th, again, we have a little preview of Cytospora canker management. We'll have a whole session on Cytospora canker and how to manage it in the landscape. And then finally, we'll conclude on the March 30th with EAB treatment strategies and options. So tune into those. You can go to our website, of course, treecarescience.com, which I don't have written down, but at treecarescience.com, treecarescience.com. Again, that's my information if you guys have any questions. And we are right on time, leaving us about 15 minutes for questions. And so I will pull up the question box here and let's see what we have. So let's see here. We may have answered some of these throughout the talk, but bear with me. I'm going to make it big. Okay. We have the first question here is, how would regulated plants respond if their xylem is compromised by a canker disease? Should we avoid using on verticillium wilt infected plants? It's a great question. So again, verticillium wilt, one of the problems with verticillium wilt is, well, it's a few things, of course. One is, of course, they can actually damage that vascular system. So that's an issue. But part of it, though, too, is because it's damaging that vascular system, it's inducing a drought response into the plant. So we talked about how we can improve the drought response of a plant when we use Canvastat. So from that standpoint, from the fact that it is inducing drought response into the plant as part of the ways it's damaging the plant, we can affect the plant positively by reducing that that response there. Now, the other part of verticillium wilt, of course, is that, you know, the plant is going to try to wall that off. So if the plant doesn't die that first year it gets verticillium wilt, it's going to try to wall it off going into that second year. So one of the things, now this probably we need to do more research on, but this is kind of an option that's out there that we know happens sometimes. As I mentioned that we're augmenting hormones. And so one of the things that we are going to see more of is we're going to see increased cell division on some plants. And so that increased cell division in some cases can help with that coated process. So it can help the plant wall off these things faster. Now, again, that's not very well researched, and that's going off the cuff. So I'd say, I wouldn't count on that or market that as such, but that is a potential when we use Canvastat type 2 plant growth regulators. And I hope I answer your question there. So the next question here is, we showed pictures of crab apples. The question is, are those two crab apples the same cultivar? I believe they are. And so I can double check the research, but most of the time when we're doing this kind of this research where we're doing multiple replications, we try to work through, what's the term I'm looking for? We're trying to take all the questions out of there. So, if we're doing a treatment on, say, crab apples, then we are trying to definitely use the same variety of crab apples. And obviously we know that nowadays we have crab apples that are more resistant to those scab diseases. So I would say that, again, they're going to be the same variety, but I can double check with you on that. Let's see here. Oops, sorry. I just lost my spot. Give me a second. Bear with me, guys. Will this affect uptake of trunk-injected products for insect and disease control? That's a great question. Again, we have a lot. So again, I don't think this has been researched, but we have a lot of people out there that are using Canvastat in conjunction with applying things like Zytec for scales, with applying benzoate for EAB. And again, I don't think this has been very well researched in farming. This might be a great thing to research, but anecdotally, I don't know of anything that applying Cambistat and doing insect control or disease control has any negative effects. Also, we have oaks that are being injected for oak wilt, with alamo, elms for, again, such elm disease. And so while it's not well researched that I know of, anecdotally not seen anything there. So let's see here. Can you mix iron and Cambistat and inject it into the soil? You could. Again, I would say you would want to split that application up. So when we're injecting iron into the soil, we want to affect a large area of soil. So we want to get out again into that root zone. We want to get out just past that the crown there. With Cambistat, we want to keep that really concentrated, and we want to keep that right up against the base of the tree. So you could do this on the same day, but I would do the Cambistat drench, and then do your typical kind of grid pattern for iron, or vice versa, whatever works best for your operation. Can this be used with turf for the same results? Everyone wants us to use this on turf. So I will say that when applied correctly, you can regulate turf and make it dark green and beautiful, but it is not labeled for that. There are turf growth regulators that you can investigate with similar that utilize similar technology. Let's see here. Are we going to? Yeah, guys. Sorry, done me again. Bear with that. I'm not a. If this was the radio, I wouldn't be a great DJ right now. Has Cambistat ever been used for girdling roots? There are certainly some companies. Again, this is one of the things that haven't been. There's not necessarily documented research on this, but there are certainly companies that will sever large girdling roots and then apply Cambistat to help with that. And we can think about that piece of research that we showed at the Bartlett Research Lab where we were severing large roots. We were severing half of the roots on one side and then using Cambistat as a treatment to help them recover. So that's definitely an option for you. So the next question is, does it improve cuticle growth on present foliage or the new foliage? So that would be the new foliage. So anything that exists at the time of application is you can see increased chlorophyll content in those leaves. But as far as the morphological changes won't occur until the new growth is present. Here we have a question. We have a 30-inch diameter silver maple that will be root pruned for sidewalk repair and replacement. Very close to the trunk. When do we treat? So in this case here, what I like to be when we're doing, when we know we're going to have damage to roots, I like to be ahead of that damage. So I like to apply prior to when those roots are damaged, because again, it's going to take a little while, especially if you're looking at what do we have here, a 30-inch diameter silver maple. It's going to take time for the Cambistat to make its way up into the plant, affect gibberellin production, again, that tip, that subapical meristem, and start seeing that response. So I like to apply, in this case here, a lot would go into the application, but I would say definitely, at least about 30 days prior to application is what I would like to see that at. But we can talk more if you have more questions on that. So the next question, so would this reduce woody growth such as twig galls? That's a great question. So I think with the twig galls, we're referring to, snipid wasp gall, like, again, gouty oak gall, horned goat gall, or something like that. It's a great question. I don't know. Again, that's the wasp is actually messing with plant hormones to get it to create that woody growth. So that's a great question. I don't know. Might be worth some research there too. Let's see here. Bear with me here, y'all. So the next question, do we have any recommendations for applications to trees that have non-target plants directly around the trunk or the application area? So my recommendation there is, again, when we're doing the application, keep it as close to the base of the trunk as possible. So the cool thing about Camstat is it holds very, very tightly to soil particles. So we see very little lateral growth, and we see very little downward, or not growth rather, movement. We see very little downward movement or lateral movement in the product. So it stays very close to where you apply it. Where we do see issues of overregulation is if the tree is on a hill and we have actual soil movement. So if the soil moves, like let's say we have like a really heavy rainstorm and we have loose sandy-ish type soils or sandy loam soils, and we have soil that had Camstat applied to it, it moves down the hill, you will see regulation. And again, this is mostly if there's turf there, you can see the turf regulation of where that soil has moved. So again, as long as there is not a plant directly around the base, and what I mean like growing on the side of the tree almost, you shouldn't see too much over-regulation. Again, as long as it's held as close to the base as possible. Let's see here, guys. Say here, so some insects lay their eggs on the leaves, which in turn creates a leaf gall. Does a thicker leaf promote a leaf gall? That's another great question. Again, this is looks like it's in relation almost to our other question there, because it was from the same fella. But no, again, that would be interesting to take a look at. And certainly at this point, you know, we have a lot of trees that have been applied to Camstat with in areas where we have leaf gall and the twig gall. So it would be interesting to do maybe like a clinical kind of study to go out and take a look at some of these good ideas, good thoughts here. And then finally, let's see, we have one more question, I believe, here. And since Camstat reduces trunk diameter, would that in itself help with the girdling roots? And yeah, I mean, there is a good point there. That could help with the girdling roots. But keep in mind, though, sometimes too, that girdling root, the reason why we're worried about it is because it's also a girdling root. And so what you would do is you would kind of reset both of those, both the trunk and the girdling root. So they'd be growing at about the same, they'd be growing at the same rate. So so if it was directly in contact with the tree, you might still have those issues. If it's one of those girdling roots that isn't quite girdling yet, so like in the circling root area, then that would certainly, you know, again, that would slow it down for you. So great, guys and gals. So it is 12:57. I believe we got through all the questions. If I left anyone out, I certainly do apologize. Again, you can see my information there on the screen. If you have any questions, you can feel free to call or text. You can email me and let me know, and I'd be more than happy to get with you guys. And again, if there are no more questions, which it seems as though there's not, then let's break for today. Oh, the question is, can we get a copy of the webinar? Absolutely. I'll make a note of that right now, and I can send that over to you. And again, if anyone else wants a copy, feel free to just reach out to me via email, and I'll send you a link. So again, with that, thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you for your patronage. And at any time, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to our technical support line, check out our website, treecarescience.com, and maybe we'll talk a little bit tomorrow, same time. Guys, gals, have a great day, have a great afternoon, and we look forward to hearing you soon. Bye.